So as we go through this Old Testament survey tonight, we are on point number 12, which is on the kingdom. We're almost there, folks. We're going to be done. You're going to be an Old Testament scholar. You're going to teach people in Hebrew. You're going to be ready to go. Hopefully you've been learning, maybe not feeling that great, but have been learning through this. So once again, as we look through this, tonight we're going to talk about the kingdom and how it's established through the life of David and Solomon. Then pretty quickly as this kingdom develops, it's going to have what's going to happen 13. There's division's going to take place. It's going to be pretty significant, and it's going to separate Israel into Judah, and then there's going to be an exile out of that, and then a return, and then the end of the Old Testament. So as we do every week, let me do this in a quick format. Just as a reminder that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. He created all things good. He created all things for His glory. It was all good until we got involved in it. After He created all things good, we rebelled against God. We sinned in the garden, and there was a fall, number 2, that happened. Not only were there punishments that were given out for the people that were involved, but also we inherited those punishments. We are also living in a fallen world because of it. And God said they sent them out, that there was going to be this prophecy that was said that the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent were going to be fighting for a long time. And He promised in Genesis 3:15 that one day the seed of a woman, somebody that no man could get the credit for, was going to come and stomp on that devil's head. Even though he would strike him in the feet, that he would come upon, and that everything that was done wrong in the garden would be made right again. So as Adam and Eve left the garden, they had Cain and Abel. And you think your family has problems? Well, theirs has a lot of them. And as sin continued to get out of control through Cain and Abel and generations past that, so much that God said enough is enough. And He decided to put an end to it by coming and bringing His wrath in the form of a flood. Noah and his family were the only ones saved in that event. And so once again, God's wrath was coming against civilization, coming against all the people. And if you were on the inside of the boat, you were okay. But if you were on the outside of the boat, you were going to suffer that wrath. So as Noah gets off of the boat, we realize that even in that Noah is not the most righteous man. Even though he's the most righteous man the earth has provided, is he righteous enough? No, he's not righteous enough. He's not righteous enough at all. And so he's in desperate need of even salvation. And so as they start to repopulate the earth and they start to try to build their way up to God in the Tower of Babel, and God scatters the people, and then He makes a covenant with a guy by the name of Abraham. Starts off and says, Abraham, I'm going to make a covenant with you. You're going to promise some things to me. I'm promising some things with you. And from your family is going to come someone who's going to set all these things right again. And so that covenant starts off with Abraham. Abraham has Isaac. Isaac has Jacob. Jacob has 12 sons. And one of those sons is a kid by the name of Joseph, who gets on his brother's nerves. And all of a sudden one day they decide to sell him into slavery. He goes all the way into what nation? Egypt, right? And then all of a sudden a famine hits, and Joseph is the only one that's in tune enough with the Lord to know that they need to start storing the food. Pharaoh puts him in as second in command, so one of Israel's sons is now second in command of the most powerful nation in the world. And so all of a sudden when Israel's sons have to come because they're about to starve, they come to Egypt to get food from the only person who has food in the whole region. And that just happens to be their baby brother, whom they don't recognize right now. And so when Joseph sees them, he recognizes them, they don't recognize him. He tests them to see if they've made any changes, and then all of a sudden he reveals himself to them. And it's over, and they are overwhelmed because they're thinking, uh-oh, we did. But Joseph shows them grace, brings them into the family, brings them into the nation. And now Israel moves into Egypt, and they live there pretty well for a couple hundred years. But then after that, the new Pharaoh arises and doesn't know these guys and doesn't know why they have so many kids, and that he starts thinking they could probably have an army and wipe us out. And so he enslaves them, puts them in bondage, and starts to mistreat them, so much so that the people of God begin to call out to God. And God answers and hears them and sets a plan for redemption in motion. And when He does that, He calls out and says, well, I'm going to make an exodus happen. You're going to exit out of here. And so God, through the form of 10 plagues, puts Pharaoh to his knees. And eventually He says, okay, enough is enough. You can have these people. And they go out to on the way to the promised land. After they are redeemed, after they have been rescued, after they have been set free from bondage, He gives them commandments. He did not give them the commandments while they were still in slavery. He gave them the commandments when they were free. And that is so important for us to remember. And He says, now that you are my people, I want you to live like my people. I want you to act like my people. So here's some commandments that I want you to give. He gave them 10 major ones, but He also gave 613 all in the Old Testament. Hopefully you've memorized them by now and ready to go. There will be a pop quiz tomorrow. No, there's 613 commandments. And these guys, they don't keep them too well. And so that leads us to point 8, where they are in a set of wanderings, where they continue to wander in the wilderness, trying to figure out their way to go because they can't follow the commandments. And along the way, God is weaning these people down and teaching them to rely on Him. Eventually, a group of people finally make it to number 9, Canaan, where they get to be the promised land, and they get to be there. The only 2 guys remaining from the original Exodus party were, who are they? So you have Caleb and Joshua, right? These 2 guys are the only ones that make it there to Canaan. They have to go in, and Joshua's going to lead them through military general strategy and get them to the place they need to be. They finally settle in, and the problem is that they settle in, and they really get used to this, and they don't really depend upon the Lord, and they start a cycle of sin that we see in the book of Judges, where the people would sin, and then all of a sudden God would bring about suffering to wake them up, and the suffering would get so bad that supplication would take place, and they would cry out to God, and God would send a salvation in the form of a judge, and the cycle would start over and over and over again. And eventually, as the people sort of are looking for a leader, they reject God as their leader. I'm sorry, was that me? Hello? It's actually your cell phone, whoever that was. No, I'm joking. Okay, so then there's this rejection that takes place, that goes down, takes place, and they reject God. They said that we want a king like all the other nations have a king. And God says, well, you've had me. And they go, we know, but we want something else because you haven't been enough. And so what kind of king do they want? They want a tall, dark, handsome, and rich king. And so God gives them exactly what they wanted and everything they did not need in the life of a guy by the name of Saul. And so when all of a sudden they put all their hope in a very tall man, then another tall man comes into the region named Goliath. And our tall guy is scared of their tall guy, and they realize that their strength should not be in what man's strength is, but what God's strength is. And at that battlefield, God shows them a different type of bravery. It's a type of bravery seen in the life of David, who's not boasting about his own strength, but the strength of the Lord. So now we come to the point where now Saul is going to be handing over that kingdom, whether he likes it or not, over to David. You see there in the first couple of lines, it says, after the people got what they desired in King Saul, God appointed another king to lead his people. As David took the throne, the kingdom of Israel was established. So let's look at what happens in the fall of King Saul. That sounds like it rhymes a little bit. Here's the deal. After David defeats Goliath, Israel begins to praise David more than King Saul. We read this really quick as we ended up last week, but as they come back from the military field, all the women began to sing some songs, and they sing songs like this. Saul has killed his thousands, but David has killed his what? Tens of thousands. Now there's a man, right? You know, he's killed lots of people. And so Saul begins to get jealous of this guy who used to play harp in his courts, and now he's kind of the national hero. And he's a little bit jealous of this guy. Can't ever imagine that happening, could you? And so what happens eventually is that King Saul tries to kill David, but David will not seek revenge and lets God have control. In 1 Samuel 18:26, we see that all of a sudden Saul is going to be so upset with what's going on that he's going to try to injure David. When you look at 1 Samuel chapter 18, verse 26, it says it this way. And when his servants told David these words, it pleased David well to be the king's son-in-law before the time had expired. I gave you the wrong verse. That doesn't even make sense there, now does it? Well, it's a really good one. So look at verse 10. The next day a harmful spirit from God rushed upon Saul, and he raved within his house while David was playing the lyre, as he did day by day. Saul had his spear in his hand. And Saul hurled the spear, for he thought, I will pin David to the wall. But David evaded him twice. Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was what? With him. There's that line again, right? The Lord was with him, for he departed from Saul. So the Lord had departed from Saul, but is with David. And so what happens is that Saul decides he's going to just take matters into his own hands. He's jealous, he's upset, and so he throws a spear down at King Saul. And what you notice about this, I want you to think about it this way, but if I decide that I'm going to throw a spear, and I'm going to throw it at Kendrick's here tonight, okay? So just go ahead and get ready. I know, just because you're sitting up close. If I throw a spear at him and I miss, who has the spear now? Exactly. See, okay? You see the danger here with throwing a spear? It's like you throw it, you better hit it, right? Because if you miss, it's on, right? So you going, butterfingers. All right. So if it's on, what happens is if you throw that spear and you miss, now your enemy has that weapon. You following me? And what does David do with that weapon? He drops it. It's not my responsibility. God's the avenger, not me. If God wants me king, he will do it in his time. I'm not going to make things happen for him. I'm not going to force it. I'm not going to rush it. Because had David already been anointed as king? Yes, he had. So I think, oh, this is the time. Here, brother, I got your spear. Let's do this. Can David hit a moving target pretty well? Oh, yeah. He can hit Goliath. Guarantee he can hit Saul with a spear, okay? So David could have done it, but what does he say? It's not my business to decide who gets to live or die. That's God's business. So even no matter what Saul is going to do to me, I'm going to do right by him. This is God's appointed king right now. Even though I'm anointed, I'm next in line. I'm going to wait God's timing. I'm going to listen to the way he's pulling all this stuff together, and I'm not going to rush things. Can I tell you folks right now, that is a good piece of advice for some of us tonight. Don't rush it. Don't push it. If it's God's will, it'll be at the right time. If you push it, it may not be God's will anymore. You follow me? How many times have somebody said, I know the Lord wants me with somebody, I'm supposed to get married, and they don't find that right person, so they settle for something less and trying to force it to work. How does that work out for them? Not very good at all. Not good at all. And so sometimes you've got to be patient to say, if the Lord has promised, it's going to happen. So a lot of times I'll talk with somebody who say, I'm looking for Mr. Right or Mrs. Right. And normally if someone looks at me and says, I'm looking for Mr. Right, I don't say, Mr. Right's looking for Mrs. Right too, and you ain't it, right? You might think that. You may or may not say it. But a lot of times people can think, I'm just waiting for this person just to come in and be perfect and just come looking for me. And I go, normally, yeah, those wonderful people are normally looking for other wonderful people. So why don't you work on you rather than expecting them to show up, right? They're looking for somebody with some character and some moral worth, and somebody's going after it, right? So a lot of times we go, no, the Lord's just told me they're going to have this happen. But a lot of times I will look at someone and say, all right, if you believe that the Lord wanted you to be married and to be attached with somebody who's godly and wonderful and can help grow you, do you believe that he can bring that? And they go, yeah, I do. I said, would you wait for that person? Yeah, I'd wait. Would you wait 10 years for him? No. Ooh. Now, wait a minute. No. I'd wait about 10 days, but 10 years? And that's the problem, is that we want to put a timetable on God. We got him on a stopwatch. You made a promise, God, so now it's time to deliver. And what if God says, I'll deliver, but it's going to be in a while? It's one of the hardest things about Jeremiah 29, verse 11, one of the most quoted verses out of the Bible. For I know the plans I have for you, right? Plans for a future and a hope, for welfare, not for harm. And you know what is just Jeremiah 29, 1 through 11? You know what verses 1 through 10 are? Hey, people, y'all better get used to Babylon because you're going to live here for a while. You're going to be here 70 years. Might as well plant some gardens, build some houses, have some babies, because you're going to be here a while. But don't worry, I do know the plans I have for you. They're just coming in 70 years. And we love to say, yes, Lord, I know you have the plans for you. I want to go. You know you're going to wait 70 years for that one, right? Are you willing to wait? And so what David is saying, it's not my job. Even though Saul is trying to kill him, not my job to pay back. I will say this. Forgiveness is laying down the spear. Someone tries to hurt you, you got it in your possession. Easiest thing to do is to fire back. Forgiveness is dropping that spear and saying, I'm leaving it here. That's the Lord's business, not mine. Not mine. That's what forgiveness looks like for me. And so especially if you have said that you have forgiven someone, especially for anybody in here that's married, you ever been in that relationship, for those of you who want to get married, I'm going to give you a little piece of advice. If you lay down that spear, you don't pick it back up in a week from now. You let it stay there. When you forgive, you forgive. When God forgives, he says he forgives and he forgets. He remembers our sins no more. Love keeps no record of wrongs. So when you forgive, you don't say, oh, by the way, I've been holding this back for a rainy day. You let it go. You let it go. That's what God's calling him to do. So David realizes, I got to let the spear go. I'm not in charge here. And so Saul is starting to get really, really scared here, really, really overwhelmed at what's going on. And he's frantic. And when we are frantic, we make some very, very bad calls, do we not? So what takes place next is that Saul does not hear from God, so he consults a medium at Endor, whom God uses to call on Samuel and predict his death. And you go, what's a medium? I thought that was just kind of a middle thing. A medium is kind of like a witch, someone who does sorcery, reads palms, fortune teller, whatever you want to call it. That's what a medium means. So here is King Saul the Tall, the bravest of them all, about to have a great fall. Okay, so I'm going to stop while I'm ahead. He's frantic because he can't hear from God. He's going, I need to hear. So what does he do? He goes to the crazy lady who's a fortune teller. That's what he does. He goes and he speaks to her. And so this is what happens. Go down Verse 3 says, Now Samuel had died, and all Israel had mourned for him and buried him in Ramah, his own city. And Saul had put the mediums and the necromancers out of the land. If you don't know what a necromancer is, that's someone who talks to the dead. Okay, so there you go. The Philistines assembled and came and encamped at Shunem, and Saul gathered all Israel, and they encamped at Gilboa. When Saul saw the army of the Philistines, he was afraid, and his heart trembled greatly. And when Saul inquired of the Lord did not answer him, either by dreams or by the Urim. That's kind of the way they would sort of determine God's will, or by prophets. Then Saul said to his servants, Seek out for me a woman who is a medium, that I may go to her and inquire of her. And the servant said to him, Behold, there is a medium at Endor. Wait a minute. Didn't you just say that you told him to put them all to death? Yep. Is there any left around? Yep, there is. I'd like to call on one now. Desperate times calls for some crazy measures, don't they? Hey, don't miss this. At one point in Saul's life, he thought something was evil and sinful, and later as life, he compromised his own standards. Okay? One point he thinks it's wrong, at another point he gets frantic, he compromises his own standards. Look at verse 8. This story is crazy. We got to read it. So Saul disguised himself and put on other garments and went, he and 2 men with him. They came to the woman by night, and he said, Divine for me by a spirit, and bring up for me whomever I shall name to you. The woman said to him, Surely you know what Saul has done. She doesn't know she's talking to him. How he has cut off the mediums and the necromancers from the land. Why then are you laying a trap for my life to bring about my death? But Saul swore to her by the Lord, As the Lord lives, no punishment shall come upon you for this thing. Then the woman said, Whom shall I bring up for you? He said, Bring up Samuel for me. This is the priest, right? That it put him in position of leadership. Verse 12. When the woman saw Samuel, she cried out with a loud voice. And the woman said to Saul, Why have you deceived me? You are Saul. The king said to her, Do not be afraid. What do you see? And the woman said to Saul, I see a God coming up out of the earth. It's a spiritual being. Some kind of weird thing going on. He said to her, What is his appearance? And she said, An old man is coming up, and he is wrapped in a robe. Saul knew that it was Samuel, and he bowed his face to the ground and paid homage. Then Samuel said to Saul, This is the dead guy talking, by the way. Yeah, some of you are like, Man, this story's crazy. This sounds like some movie I watched one time, right? Why have you disturbed me by bringing me up? Saul answered, I am in great distress, for the Philistines are warring against me, and God has turned away from me and answers me no more, either by prophets or by dreams. Therefore I have summoned you to tell me what I shall do. And Samuel said, Why then do you ask me, since the Lord has turned from you and become your enemy? This is the dead guy talking. All right, verse 17. The Lord has done to you as he spoke by me, for the Lord has torn the kingdom out of your hand and given it to your neighbor David, because you did not obey the voice of the Lord and did not carry out his fierce wrath against Amalek. Therefore the Lord has done this thing to you this day. Moreover, the Lord will give Israel also with you in the hand of the Philistines, and tomorrow you and your sons shall be with me. Well, you dead. Yeah. The Lord will give the army of Israel also into the hands of the Philistines. Then Saul fell at once full length on the ground, filled with fear because of the words of Samuel, and there was no strength in him, for he had eaten nothing all day and all night. And here, we'll stop here. Now is this story, it's kind of weird, right? Some of us, honestly, if you read this, some of you go, I don't think this needs to be in the Bible, because this sounds kind of crazy. It sounds like that they're using some type of medium, necromancer, kind of satanic, if you will, demonic activity, and it's working. And I would ask you, why would you think it wouldn't? See, a lot of times we want to give God the rightful credit that he does, but we fail to remember that there are other spiritual powers in this world. There are other spiritual forces in this world. And Paul says in Ephesians 6 very carefully, you're wrestling against flesh and blood, but don't you realize you're going up against spiritual powers? And you dressing up for a fist fight, and there's a spiritual battle going on that fists don't work in. Like you're wasting your time here. And so you look at this and you go, so do you mean to tell me that there was some woman who had powers to talk with a dead person? Well, we just read it, didn't we? Now, does that mean that everybody has this power to do it? Absolutely not. But can Satan use power and deceive people? Sure he can. Was this Samuel? I don't know. Was this some kind of vision? Was this a demon dressed up as Samuel? I don't know. But I know this. Words pretty much sound like Samuel, don't they? And what he says is going to come true within the next 24 hours. So does it seem like he's even speaking on behalf of what's right? This is a weird, unique story that does not necessarily tell us the kind of, obviously, is this telling us what we need to do when we're trying to figure out our path for life? No, not at all. But this is the evidence of saying that there are spiritual forces at work. And there's a lot of times even demonic activity that is accurate, even if wrong. And so I believe that at this moment, Saul is desperately looking for answers, and he goes looking at it in a horrible, demonic way. And I think that the Lord allows this one to work to wake him up and to scare him. And to show this, Saul, you have walked away from hearing from the prophets the moment when you decided to start taking holy things into your hand that I said were just for the priests to do, and you thought because you were king you could get away with it. When you fail to obey the commandments that I've given you, that's when you decided you're going to walk away from it. And so that's the moment he goes, yeah, you're going to have to come up with some other matters because you're not coming to me for answers anymore. And so with this is a telling sign of what takes place. And then what's crazy about this whole story is that it comes true. Saul gets struck by a Philistine arrow, then falls on his own sword so that he won't be tortured. He is so fearful that these Philistines, by the way, it is interesting, in 31, it just says a random archer just shot an arrow up in the air, and it just happened to land in the only soft place in Saul's armor. Well, isn't that a coincidence? You know, it's the promise of what has been spoken over him. This is what's going to take place. So this arrow flies in. Saul is injured. He's not dead, but the Philistines start running on him, and he falls on his own sword, so he will not be tortured or humiliated. And at that point, the kingdom of King Saul is over, which brings us to David. And let's talk about the good of David's kingdom, because there are some good things. There's also some not so good things. We'll get to that in just a minute. But first off is that David establishes Jerusalem as the capital and fortifies the nation. So 1 Samuel, by the way, if you think about it, it's kind of odd. Samuel is dead in the middle of 1 Samuel, and we still got another book with his name on it, right? It's kind of a little bit different. This book was originally one book. 1 and 2 Samuel was one book together. Somebody years ago said, let's divide it in half when David becomes king, just to kind of make it a little bit more manageable. Samuel's the first character in it, majorly the first guy in the narrative, and so that name goes to him. Obviously, he's probably not writing at this portion in the story, but who knows? He's talking at some point, so who really knows, right? But one of the things he does is he establishes Jerusalem as the capital, and he fortifies the nation. In 2 Samuel chapter 5, he's going to do some incredible things and really start leading in a certain way. And obviously the next thing that starts doing is that he is going to fortify the nation and really start beefing up the army, putting up walls where they need to be put, and sort of actually now, this is not a ragtag group of people like in different tribes living in this area. It's going to be a legitimate kingdom. We're starting to get some order now that they haven't ever had before. Second thing is David brings the ark back and unifies worship for the nation. In 2 Samuel chapter 6, we see when the ark is brought back into Jerusalem, and then also how he unifies worship for the nation. The book of Psalms was the original song book for the Israelites. 150 worship songs. I think David wrote 70-something of those. And so a lot of these are personal worship songs that he would write and then would share with them. There's other people that wrote a lot of other worship songs, but there's a lot of beautiful truth in it. A lot of wonderful things that they teach, but also it's a way to sort of archive what was going on. We won't go through all the different things in 2 Samuel 6, but I do want you to turn there for a second, because this is such an incredible story for me. One of my favorite stories in the Bible of really looking through what happens as David is instituting worship. I'll go through some of it here because remember how the Philistines had captured the ark? And remember how the ark kept giving them bad luck? And they finally said, okay, we don't want it anymore. And what happens is they put it back, they give it back to Israel. And at this point in the story, 2 Samuel chapter 6, it's been 75 years since the Ark of the Covenant has been back in the possession of the Israelites, and they have not been using it. 75 years they've had access to the presence of God, and they've been complacent with it. Just think about that. And so they're sitting there, and verse 3 of chapter 6. We'll go to verse 2. And David arose and went with all the people who were with him from Baal Judah to bring up from there the ark of God, which is called by the name of the Lord of hosts, who sits enthroned on the cherubim. And they carried the ark of God on a what? A new cart, and brought it out of the house of Abinadab, which is on the hill. And Uzzah and Ahio, the sons of Abinadab, were driving the new cart with the ark of God, and Ahio went before the ark. Now, really quick, for those of you Bible buffs, you remember when the Ark of the Covenant was supposed to be carried, how are they supposed to carry it? On poles. Who got to carry it? Priests did. Levites, guys that were consecrated for this worship type of ministry. They had a specific way that they were supposed to carry this, and now these guys are doing what? They're driving it on a what? A cart. Oh, but it's a new cart. We got a nice one. This is a nice cart, though. It's really good. Question. Where did they ever see anybody driving the Ark of the Covenant on a cart? The Philistines. So they learned how to worship God by those who did not know God. These people are taking up practices that they saw the pagan Philistines do and go, man, driving on that cart's a lot easier than carrying that thing. Let's just do that. Let's just get a new cart, why don't you? Okay, that'll work great. Let's see what happens. Verse 5. David and all the house of Israel were celebrating before the Lord with songs and lyres and harps and tambourines and castanets and cymbals. And when they came to the threshing floor of Nacon, Uzzah put out his hand to the ark of God and took hold of it, for the oxen stumbled. And the anger of the Lord was kindled against Uzzah, and God struck him down there because of his error, and he died there because of the ark of God. And David was angry because the Lord had broken out against Uzzah. And that place is called Perez Uzzah to this day, which means the breaking out against Uzzah. I just think this is funny. I know it's not as funny someone's died, but it's just the fact that David is angry at God. What are you going to do? David, you angry at God? Well, good luck. Yeah, you're going to win this one, right? Picture this. The oxen driving the cart, Ahio and Uzzah, they're walking beside it. And the oxen just happens to step into a little pothole there, and the little cart starts shaking. The Ark of the Covenant starts wobbling. You know what's in the Ark of the Covenant. You know how holy that is. You know how shiny that gold is. Uzzah did exactly what every single one of us would have done, right? Stuck out your hand so that ark doesn't hit the dirt. Because we think that somehow that our hands are cleaner than the dirt. And Uzzah found out he was dead wrong. Uzzah thought that it would be horrible to touch the ground and safe to touch me. And he didn't realize that the dirt was actually holier than he was. Because as soon as he touches it, God goes, you are taking care of my business with unholy hands in ways I have not prescribed. And he wakes him up. Someone dies right there. And David goes, I don't want this thing anymore. I don't want it. I don't want it. Put it somewhere else. I don't want to take care of it. And so this is great, right? Follow this. Verse 9. And David was afraid of the Lord that day. He said, how can the ark of the Lord come to me? So David was not willing to take the ark of the Lord into the city of David. But David took it aside to the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite. And the ark of the Lord remained in the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite 3 months, and the Lord blessed Obed-Edom and all his household. And it was told King David, the Lord has blessed the household of Obed-Edom and all that belongs to him because of the ark of God. So now David went and brought up the ark of God from the house of Obed-Edom to the city of David rejoicing. Okay, all right. So now if it's a good thing, I want it. If it's a scary thing, whose house is that? That's Obed-Edom. It's going to his house. You hold on to it, Obed-Edom. And I can just imagine Obed-Edom's going, are you kidding me? They're burying Uzzah over there. I get the big, shiny, golden box. Hopefully he did not have preschoolers in the house, right? Can you imagine? Do not touch the ark. What? Just like, no, I'm serious. I know I normally tell you don't touch stuff. Really don't touch this stuff, right? You come in, and Obed-Edom is in his house. The ark of the covenant resides for 3 months, and the Lord blesses him, and it's a good thing. And David hears about it. Now we don't have time to do this, but a good Bible study for some of you to do. I double dog dare you to search Obed-Edom through the rest of the Old Testament and see where you find him. Because you know what you're going to find? I'm going to give you a little heads up and then you look for him later. Every time you find Obed-Edom from this point on, whenever there's a volunteer drive that's needed somewhere near the tabernacle where the Ark of the Covenant is, guess whose name is on that list? Obed-Edom. You want singers? I can sing. Daddy, you've never sang. I'm singing now. Oh, y'all need you need a trumpet player? Oh yeah, I got one of those in the back. I'll be a trumpet player. Oh, you need a door holder? Which door? The door that leads people into the presence of God. And he goes, I'll do that. I walk 10 miles from my house up there as often as I can. Why? Because once you've gotten used to the presence of God, you can't live unless you're close to Him. Amen. You can't breathe unless you get near Him. And so he says, I don't care what it is. I will sign up. I will be right. I've got to be near Him at all costs. And so Obed-Edom goes back and forth, day in and day out, just to be near to that presence of the Lord again. Look at these last few verses. I know I said I wouldn't go all the way, but this is just too rich. Okay. Follow this. They're all rejoicing because it's a good thing. Verse 13. See if you see what's changed here. And when those who bore the ark, does that sound different to anybody? That's not on the card anymore, is it? They finally realized maybe God's Word has something to say about this. They dusted it off and thought, God means put this on poles. And they did it the right way. And then follow this. When those who bore the ark of the Lord had gone 6 steps, he sacrificed an ox and a fattened animal. Catch this. Imagine it. You hold up the ark. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Stop. Somebody may have sinned in those last 6 steps. Let's have a worship service and have a sacrifice here. Who knows? They got a 10-mile trek to go, folks. Don't y'all ever complain about one of my sermons or a worship service going long around here. Don't you ever, ever complain. I will show you. You will pay for that one. Listen. And what happens? Verse 14, David danced before the Lord with all his might. And David was wearing a linen ephod. So David and all the house of Israel brought up the ark of the Lord with shouting and with the sound of the horn. As the ark of the Lord came to the city of David, Michal, the daughter of Saul. Okay, stop right there. You know who Michal also is? Not only is she the daughter of Saul, guess who else she is? She's the wife of David. He's going to his own house, and yet they call Michal more like her dad than her husband. Why? Because she was acting more like Saul than David here. It doesn't say Michal, David's wife. It says the daughter of Saul. Looked out the window, saw King David leaping and dancing before the Lord, and she despised him in her heart. They brought in the ark of the Lord and set it in its place inside the tent that David had pitched for it. David offered burnt offerings and peace offerings before the Lord. And when David had finished offering the burnt offerings and the peace offerings, he blessed the people in the name of the Lord of hosts. Going down, verse 20, here it is. And David returned to bless his household. But Michal, the daughter of Saul, came out to meet David and said, well, how the king of Israel honored himself today, uncovering himself today before the eyes of his servants, female servants, as one of the vulgar fellows shamelessly uncovers himself. And now, here, this is where a lot of times people get, isn't that time that David danced naked before the Lord? It says that he stripped down into a linen ephod. Okay? Does not mean that he's running through the streets with nothing on. It means that he took off his kingly robes and became just like an average worshiper. Because when you're in the presence of the Lord, royalty just sort of flies out the window. It don't matter who you are, what position you have. So he took that off, and I'm just going to be like everybody else here today. And he did get a little rowdy in his worship. And he's not ashamed of it. But his wife realizes this. Oh, my girlfriend saw this. I'm so embarrassed. Honey, all my friends saw this. You walked in, and what am I going to do? You know, like she's overwhelmed. Hey, some of you know the frustration, maybe not of that, but when the Lord is doing something mighty in your life and you're wanting to come home and tell somebody about it, instead of open arms and high fives and hugs and celebration, it's going, what were you thinking? What were you thinking out there? I can't tell you how many times a teenager gets so excited about things of the Lord at a church camp and then goes home and a parent's just squelch it right away. Here's David going home. Look what happened. Look what happened. This is incredible, darling. This is awesome. How dare you do that? Embarrass me in front of other people. And look what David's wonderful words he says to his darling bride. And David said in Michal, verse 21, it was before the Lord who chose me above your daddy. Okay. and above all his house to appoint me as prince over Israel, the people of the Lord, and I will celebrate before the Lord, and I will make myself even more contemptible than this. I will be abased in your eyes, but by the female servants of whom you have spoken, by them I shall be held in honor. And Michal, the daughter of Saul, had no child until the day of her birth. Isn't that an interesting little just caveat that's thrown out there at this point? Now, there's this beautiful thing even with this, and I know we got to move. Okay, but this passage is so very rich that you see this complexity in David, that he is this literally like incredible king who doesn't mind just being authentic in his worship and getting down there. He doesn't matter what else happens. And so as a result of this, David desires to build God a house, but God says he will build David a house. David says, all right, God, that worship service is great, but I want to build you a big old temple, and it's going to be better than my palace. It's going to be better than any house anybody's living in. It's going to be incredible. And God says, thanks, but no thanks. Yes, that's going to happen, but not by your hands. Okay? Hey, sometimes, folks, some of the things we've been praying for and longing for may not happen until we're dead and gone. May not happen. That's all right. That's all right. David wants a temple to be built. It will be, but it's going to be built by Solomon. David's a man of bloodshed. David's going to have some stuff in his past. He does not need to build that temple. And God says, hey, here's the deal, David. I appreciate you wanting to build a house for me, but instead, I'm going to build a house for you. What do you mean? I already got a house over here. No. Different house. Somebody's going to come from your family, and the scepter's never going to depart from it. You're going to have a king that's going to rule forever, and all the nations are going to bow down to him. So you might want to guess who's in the line of King David? Jesus to come. So this is a promise made of him. Next, David inspires the mighty men of Israel. David inspires the mighty men of Israel. There's a group of men that are just lethal, loyal, just straight up killers. And they just fight because out of loyalty to him and to, I think, the cause of it. I'll read this quick passage here because I think it's incredible. But some of you have heard of David's mighty men before and all the different things. They just go on these little missions, man, for David and just do all the incredible stuff. It says, verse 4, and after this there arose war with the Philistines at Gezer. Remember, the first Philistine of the Israelites we remember fighting in this story was a guy by the name of Goliath. Remember him? Pretty impressive guy. It says this, they're at war with him again. Then Sibbecai the Hushathite struck down Sippiah, who was one of the descendants of the giants. Now, wait a minute. Who is Sibbecai the Hushathite? Anybody ever done a Bible study on him before? I haven't. Never heard of him before. And he just struck down a descendant of the giant, and the Philistines were subdued. Verse 5, and there was again war of the Philistines, and Elihan, the son of Jair, struck down Lami, the brother of Goliath the Gittite, the shaft of whose spear was like a weaver's beam. Wait a minute. Who's this guy? He just killed Goliath's brother? Why are we talking about him? Where are the songs about this guy? Nobody's got t-shirts with that guy. His name's too long, right? Okay. Then it goes on, verse 6. And there was again war at Gath, where there was a man of great stature who had 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot, 24 in number, to slap you around with. And he also was descended from the giants. And when he taunted Israel, Jonathan, the son of Shemaiah, David's brother, struck him down. These were descended from the giants in Gath, and they fell by the hand of David and by the hand of his servants. Now, some of you have been raised in church, some of you have been in and out of church, and almost everybody, if you've ever been in church, you know about David and Goliath, right? It's rare for somebody to talk about all these other giants, right? And you go, why is this not a big deal? Why don't you hear more about this? Because these guys actually seem like it's a more impressive of a victory against a bigger giant. Why is this not noteworthy news? Here's the reason why. When a giant killer is the leader, you get giant killer followers. When David is the king, he's a giant killer. So the people who come behind him, they kill giants for fun. That's what they do. Because attitude reflects leadership. When King David came along and he killed a giant, it was worth enough to make a new song about. Why? Because our king is hiding in his tent, afraid to show his face. And so it was noteworthy. But not when David is the king. It's just kind of standard thing. Like, why do we kill a giant? Well, I guess because it's Tuesday. It's just normal habit for us, right? It's just this is what we do. Why? Because our leader does this, so we're going to follow. Now, there's some good. We got to look at the bad of David's kingdom. David commits adultery and murder in the episode with Bathsheba. 2 Samuel chapter 11, verse 12. Oh my goodness, we could spend so much time on that passage. But let me just tell you something. First thing in that chapter that you see says that at the time when kings go out to battle, David stayed home. Being at the wrong place at the wrong time, folks. Wrong place, wrong time. And he goes out at night and he gets up. Where is he hanging out at? On his roof. Do you think it was the first time that David ever realized that he could look over into the bathhouse nearby? No, he knew where he could sin, and he knew exactly where he wanted to be at that point. There are certain places and certain functions and certain environments that many of us are more prone to wander. And yet, David knew that, and when he was supposed to be on the battlefield, he's at home. He sees something that he likes. He goes and sins for that woman whom he likes, has relationships with her, comes to find out, we got a problem. Bathsheba comes back and says that she has your child. And he goes, I can fix this. Because whenever sin happens and we get caught, we're just going to fix it and cover it up, right? So is she married? Yeah, she's married. One of your soldiers who's on the battle fighting your war, David. Yeah, he is actually. What's his name? Uriah? Bring him back. Uriah, how's the battle going, son? Got some battle scars there. Looks like you've been in some pretty intense battles. Sir, it's just an honor to fight for you, sir. We absolutely will fight for anything. We're just honored to be able to carry on your name. Well, you're doing great. Any kind of news? Sir, it's hard out there, but we're going to fight for you and for the glory of your name and for the glory of Israel. We're hearing this. Well, that's really good, son. I want you to get back to the battlefield tomorrow, but why don't you go home tonight? Why don't you just enjoy? You married, Uriah? Yes, sir, I am. Well, I'm sure she's a pretty lady. Why don't you just go home and spend some time with her before you go out in the battlefield? Yes, sir, I will. So he goes and sends somebody to follow behind, and what happens is that they find that Uriah is asleep on the door, the front door of his house, because he doesn't want to take a comfort, a benefit that's something that his brothers on the battle line can't have that night. So that night, David says, okay, let's up it again. Hey, I need to talk to you one more time. And he gets him drinking with him and completely inebriated where he can't think clearly anymore. And now he sends him back home. Same thing, Uriah won't do it. So David puts a letter in Uriah's hand and says, will you go give this to your commander? And Uriah walks all the way back from Jerusalem, all the way back to the battlefield, and has a letter in his hand that is his death warrant. And he gives it to his general. And his general says, hey, when the battle gets really tough, you call everybody back except Uriah, and Uriah is killed there. And so then all of a sudden, David brings in Bathsheba into his house to be his wife. And all of a sudden, there's this old preacher named Nathan who shows up one day. Says, David, King David, sir, you will not believe what's been happening out in the streets. Well, tell me, Nathan the prophet, what's going on? Well, there's this guy out here, and he has all these sheep. He's got a whole flock of sheep. He has whatever he wants to do. And all of a sudden, he saw his neighbor who just had one little lamb. That's all the guy had. And he took that lamb from the guy. The guy who had all this stuff took that lamb from this guy. And now this guy has nothing. And he's just taken and robbed him from everything. The guy who had anything he wanted, he took it. And David is just absolutely infuriated. That man deserves to die. And Nathan goes, you are that man. Points him out. And at that point, Nathan knew this. From a guy who's killing some of his best soldiers, I just gave my last sermon. That's it. What happens? David breaks. And he writes this worship song. Have mercy on me, O God, according to your steadfast love. Blot out my transgressions. My sin is ever before you. In sin my mother did conceive me. Psalm 51, he just goes through every little part of it. And it's this beautiful worship song. So even in that sin, we see the beauty that David is repentant. He is a man after God's own heart, not because he's perfect, but because he's a man who knows he needs forgiveness. David takes a census next for his own glory instead of God's glory, and God punishes the nation. It's an interesting thing that David sets out a census, just so you know that there are times in the Bible where God commands a census. And this time David took one not to record the people that were alive and to give glory to God or to keep up with folks. He wanted to brag on how many people were in his kingdom. And so he did this. This is a very dangerous kind of situation that you can find yourself into, but David is going to take a census for his own glory instead of God's glory, and God punishes the nation because of it. Next, David's son Absalom led a coup to try and become king instead of his father. So David's son Absalom, there's this bloody, awful events that take place, and Absalom kind of takes over, and David has to go on the run, and all this stuff back and forth, and family drama comes, and for once again 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, these chapters, he goes back and forth to it. And eventually even he's going along and he's fighting alongside the Philistines. There's so much drama here that David just completely almost steps away from who he knows to be and almost gives up. But eventually David returns to his senses and offers worship that cost him something. 2 Samuel chapter 24, the last chapter in Samuel, this is a beautiful passage where because of the census that he's taken, because of some of the issues that he's done, because of the sin in his own life, God has said, hey, the nation is going to be punished for this. And David said, hey, I'm the one who did it. This isn't right. I deserve this. And God says, yep, but you're going to have to make atonement for this. And so I want you to go to a specific spot. He goes, okay, where is it? He goes, it's over there. And there's this guy who has this threshing floor that I want you to buy, and I want you to set up a sacrifice right there on that spot. And so he goes up to that place in 2 Samuel. He shows up, and he's in a king's entourage. So obviously it's a pretty impressive thing that when this guy's come in, walks in, he sees Araunah the Jebusite, says, hey, I want to buy this threshing floor from you. And the Araunah looks at David and says, oh, king, you don't have to buy anything. I'm just honored you're here at my house. You can have the floor. You could even have, here's the ox, here's the wood, here's anything that you can give me. And then look at what verse 24, what he says. But the king said to Araunah, no, but I will buy it from you for a price, for I will not offer burnt offerings to the Lord that cost me nothing. That is one of the most beautiful statements on worship I've ever heard in my life. Don't offer to God something that costs you nothing. And David said, I know you want to give it to me, but no, I'm going to buy this. This is my sin. This is something that I want to offer here. And so David does come back to his senses, even though he has some major issues here. At the end of his life, he hands over the kingdom to Solomon and offers great fatherly advice. In 1 Kings chapter 2, verses 1 through 4, I love this. He's about to die. And it says that he commanded his son Solomon, saying, I'm about to go to the way of all the earth. Be strong and show yourself a man. Keep the charge of the Lord your God, walking in his ways and keeping his statutes, his commandments, his rules, and his testimonies, as is written in the law of Moses, that you may prosper in all that you do and wherever you turn, that the Lord may establish his word that he spoke concerning me, saying, if your sons pay close attention to their way, to walk before me in faithfulness with all their heart and with all their soul, you shall not lack a man on the throne of Israel. And so David kind of turns over the leadership, the kingdom to Solomon. And guess who Solomon's mother is? Anyone want that guess? Bathsheba. God can make beauty out of such mess. Guess who is in the genealogy of Jesus the Christ and recorded in Matthew chapter 1? Oh, Bathsheba. Actually, Rahab's there, Bathsheba. A bunch of ladies that honestly was sorted past. What's beautiful about even Matthew 1, you want to talk about how hard-hitting this is? It doesn't even say by Bathsheba. It says David, the father of Solomon, by the wife of Uriah the Hittite. Wow. Just showing you how messed up this family is. Why would they show you how messed up Jesus' family is? To show you yours isn't that bad. If God's redemptive plan can come through the hands of Rahab and Uriah and all these different people, you think he can't work through your situation? You think he can't work through it? I mean, they show you all the warts and scars, and you name it. He's saying, no, this is Jesus' family tree. Yours has got a little messed up too. Don't worry. It's all good. And so even with this, Solomon comes in. We see Solomon's tainted glory here. We're going to have to move through old Solomon really quick here. But you see the positives and negatives. Let's look at this first one. He was David's chosen heir. We see that in 1 Kings chapter 1. David wanted him to be king, so Absalom is definitely not it. He had a little bit of an issue there. The negative, he gained power in a bloody coup that Solomon does come alongside and have a little bit of a problem here, where he's going to, his reign to be established, and he's going to force some things when he could have probably led a little bit more diplomatic. And yet we see this kind of danger inside of Solomon that seeks to be somebody and really force. So the positive there, he's David's chosen heir. David did choose him. But then he also gained power in a really bloody type of way. Another positive is that he did have Nathan's early support. Prophet Nathan, he's still alive, amazingly. Still preaching sermons that hadn't gotten him killed yet. He has Nathan's early support. So if Nathan's in your corner, that's a pretty good sign, right? And so Nathan is supportive of the family. He's supportive of Solomon. He is all for him. But some of the negative as well is that the prophetic voice disappears in Solomon's life through the years. where it starts off where Nathan is speaking into his ear. Eventually, Solomon gets too big for his own britches. And he doesn't need to listen to anybody. Why? Because I'm the wisest man in the world. What do I have to learn from anybody? And so Solomon's pride really becomes his downfall. So where he was relying on some of these prophets and he would go to some of them for counsel later on in life, prophetic voice disappears. People aren't speaking to him because he's not seeking out their advice anymore. Positive, prayer for wisdom. He goes down in prayer and says, God, I want to lead well. I want to take care of this that you've given me. And God says, ask me anything and I'll give it to you. Now, many of you know if God tells you that, what you're supposed to ask for, right? The genie says you can have one wish. You ask for 1,000 wishes. That's what you're supposed to do, right? What did Solomon do? I just want the wisdom that's needed to rule your people. I want wisdom, God. James 1:5 says, if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God who gives all generously without reproach, right? If you lack it, ask God for the wisdom. And Solomon got it. Man, he got wisdom. And the Lord said, hey, that's a good prayer, and I'm going to benefit you greatly. He was known as what? The wisest man who ever lived. And yet we also see the rest of his life and go, what happened to this train wreck, right? Because here's another negative. He had forced labor on the people, and he had unjust wealth. He started making some of the people work for him and for his agenda and forcing that issue. He had some wealth that he accumulated through some unjust ways, some sinful ways, some ways that the king should not be getting wealth. And so all of a sudden the power is going to his head. All this wisdom that he's gotten, now he's starting to abuse it and not use it. Positive, he did complete the temple, which is a good thing. He had a completion of the temple and was finally able to do what David wanted to do. And that temple was beautiful. Absolutely exquisite. People would come from countries around just to see that temple, want to see more of it. And it's just absolutely beautiful to behold. Solomon really outdid himself there. And it was something that I thought was a man's attempt. It is funny, though, that every time when I approach God in the Old Testament, I want to build a building for you. He goes, heavens can't even hold me. I still want to build a building for you. And he's like, but just know that if the heavens can't contain me, your building can't contain me either. Don't box me in. You can have a building to celebrate and have it kind of intentional for us, but just realize you can't box me in here. So it was a positive. Negative, though, is that he had foreign wives lead him to idolatry. He had some foreign wives that lead him to idolatry. He had a few of them, actually. So many of you know the struggle with just finding one woman what to get on Valentine's Day. Imagine you got 700 wives and 300 concubines. You don't know trouble until that's your world, okay? You just don't know. You can't even begin to understand. If you can't even remember all the names of your wives, you got problems, okay? This is just problems on a whole other scale. And what happens is that he wanted to collect a woman from all these different nations just to be his trophy wives. And what happens when you get all these women who follow after other gods? They go, well, I'll be your wife. And you know what? I will be a really good wife as long as I need a statue of this God over here in our house. Baby, whatever you want. I got all the money in the world. Whatever you want. So these idols started popping up all over Solomon's house, all throughout Judaism. And you see where all this is heading. Positive, early support from Yahweh, the Lord Almighty, God Almighty, Jehovah is coming in and supporting him, for him, establishing him, going along and doing incredible things to make sure that he is cared for. He says, he consecrates the house. He says, look, you've done this. You've not turned aside from following me at this point. I'm proud of you. I'm for you. Then eventually there is a rejection from him. You realize that's 2 chapters later. God supporting him in chapter 9 and rejecting him in chapter 11. Man, how quick things can turn, right? Just a few decisions and some sinful, rebellious kind of ways. Solomon turns from the Lord. And what turns his heart from the Lord? 1 Kings 11:1 says, now King Solomon loved many foreign women. And by the way, when he says that, I have heard some people that have said some really ridiculous things that say that has to do with that God does not approve of interracial marriage. That is not what that verse says at all. There's no portion of the Bible that says that's even a deal. In fact, there's many of God's people that are doing that. It's completely fine. It says this, now King Solomon loved many foreign women, along with the daughter of Pharaoh, Moabite, Ammonite, Edomite, Sidonian, going on, from the nations concerning which the Lord had said to the people of Israel, you shall not enter into marriage with them, neither shall they with you, for surely they will turn your heart after their gods. And Solomon clung to these in love. He had 700 wives who were princesses and 300 concubines, and his wives turned away his heart. Oh, yeah, I would imagine. What is the problem? Was it the problem that they were of different race or a different country? No, they followed a different God. He was unequally yoked about 999 times. He was unequally yoked. He was trying to follow after God, and it's hard to follow after God if you want to go that way and your bride is trying to follow a different way. It's impossible to do. You're going to be torn apart. And so eventually that did for them. Let me pull these out really quick. Solomon's writings. There are 3 books. By the way, Psalms, he wrote some of the Psalms, but Proverbs is one that's all about rules for wise living. Proverbs is just a very different book. There's no other book in the Bible that's like Proverbs. But if you really want to talk about wise living, it's going to give some of those practical advice for how you live. Solomon as a father talking to his son and gives these commandments to his son. Ecclesiastes is the vanity of life. Some people read that book and go, man, this is depressing. Because he says, I tried this, tried this, tried this. Empty, 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 empty. I got degrees. I read all types of books. Yeah, worth nothing. I had all kinds of houses and gardens and nice stuff. Nothing. I got people working for me. I got people working for them who are working for me. Vanity, empty, nothing. I got so many women, I can't even remember their names. Empty, empty, empty. I drank as much as I could. Empty, empty, empty. He looks around and goes, what is the point of life? And then he finally answers in Ecclesiastes chapter 12, verses 13 and 14. He says, the conclusion is near. This is what you need to know. Fear God, keep his commandments. That's the point of life. Fear God, keep his commandments. Everything else, empty. Vanity. Striving after wind. Got nothing to do. And then the last one, Song of Solomon, was wisdom in sex and marriage. Once again, this is a book that a lot of people go, how did it even fit into the canon of Scripture? Because it is so risque in nature. A lot of people think this book is so awkward that it can't mean what it sounds like it means. Because it sounds like a man and a woman are really excited about their marriage relationship. So a lot of people have said this book is an allegory about God's love for his people, and I respect that opinion. But I think that in some ways that might disrespect a little bit what the book is supposed to be about. I think out of 66 books in the Bible, God allows one book to say, hey, here's something beautiful and sacred to think about how marriage is supposed to be upheld. And you've got the woman saying, man, my man is like nobody else, 1 in 10,000. And he's like, girl, your hair is like a flock of goats. And she's like, I know, right? And like, so they're just like, just throwing this shooting A game all day long and just giving all these compliments. Guys, I'm going to tell you, you need to write that one down. You tell a woman one time her hair is like a flock of goats. It'll work for you too. But I say this in a joking way to say, he also wrote some of the Psalms that we find in the book of Psalms. But how in the world is someone who really gives us wise advice about marriage, about living, about wise living, this is the guy who had how many wives and concubines again? So I always look at these and I go, so I want to know when he wrote those books, at what stage in his life, right? I want to know when did these things come down, like at this point or that point or this point. Here's what I think. I think he wrote Proverbs when he was walking right with the Lord, leading well, got that wisdom, implementing it. I think he wrote Song of Solomon when he was working on that good wife. And he was excited about that marriage that God had put together. And he was excited about who she was on the inside. He was also excited about who she was on the outside. And he wasn't ashamed to tell anybody about it. It was a good thing. And then he got crazy. He absolutely went off the rails. And you know what? It's a reminder, folks. You can be teaching one thing one day and disobeying it the next. The wisest man who ever lived made some of the most unwisest decisions. He knew the truth. He just failed to apply it later in his life. And I think at the end of his life, he probably wrote Ecclesiastes and said, let me just tell you, been there, done that, got the t-shirt, it's not worth it. Here's what you need to do, son. Fear God, keep his commandments. Fear God, keep his commandments. And that's good news for us today as well. Father,